Merry meet, listeners. You found your way back. I knew you would. Or maybe you're new here. Either way, enter freely and of your own will. I have been expecting you, and as always, not all who enter leave unchanged. My name is Kiran Mai, but you can just call me Kiran. My name means the one who is filled with light. And today I am taking that light and pointing it somewhere very old, very dark, and very loud with grief. As Ernest Hemingway once said, the world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at the broken places. So, this episode is dedicated to everyone who is closing a door you never wanted to close, to everyone quietly putting yourselves back together, surviving something that should never have happened, to the ones moving on, not because it stopped hurting, but because you chose, despite everything, to still be here, to still be loud, and to still take up space. Surviving is not small, it is perhaps the most courageous act of all. Welcome to episode 2 of The Mourning Map. This is your host Kiran, and let's begin collecting one tear at a time. In this episode, I am shining my light into the deep corners of Chelmsford. Chelmsford sits in Essex, about 30 miles from London, close enough to feel the city's breath, same time far enough to have kept its own soul. It has been around for over 9 centuries, quiet and modest. At its heart stands the cathedral, something that has been quietly holding this city together since the 15th century, stone that has been absorbed over 900 years of grief and prayer and ordinary Tuesday mornings. The city is widely known for being the first place where radio transmitters were ever set up. Do you want to know what it is also known for? Its repeated witchcraft trials from the 16th through the 17th centuries. Between 1566 and 1645, Essex saw more witch prosecutions than any other English county, with Chelmsford serving as the primary judicial centre where the accused faced trial, conviction, and often execution. Let's first talk about the act that made all of this possible, the 1563 Witchcraft Act. This act made witchcraft, sorcery, and consulting with witches a capital crime. We are not talking about an angry mob burning people at the stake. This is legalized killing where anyone can just be hanged, most of the time without any evidence at all. This was paperwork, courtrooms, and judges in funny wigs. So, before this law, if you were a witch, the church just made you do penance because the church's goal was to save your soul rather than just punish your body. The penances were designed to be deeply embarrassing, public, and spiritual. Queen Elizabeth I changed the game by making it a felony. It initiated nearly 175 years of persecution, resulting in the execution of thousands before its repeal in 1736. This law was created because of the Pole Fortescue plot. So the conspirators of this plot intended to proclaim Mary, Queen of Scots, as Queen of England, marry her to Edmund Pole, and restore Catholicism in England. But the rebels were caught using magical calculations to predict when the Queen would die. The government had to do something to get rid of the threat, but realized they didn't have strong enough law to punish magic. So they invented one. Let me give you a rare fact here. Queen Elizabeth's personal advisor was the most famous occultist in Europe at that time, Dr. John Dee. Yes, the woman who passed the law against magic was best friends with one. So, he used to sign his letters to the Queen with 2 circles and a 7. The circles were his eyes, and 7 was a sacred number. This is reportedly where Ian Fleming got the idea for James Bond's code name 007. Anyway, this act created a sliding scale of punishment. Death for witchcraft that caused another person's death, 1 year in prison for lesser offences like harming livestock, damaging property, general mystical nuisance, and then for a second lesser offence, also death. This system sounds almost reasonable until you realize that the evidence required to trigger it was essentially nothing. A neighbor's accusation, a testimony from a frightened child, a confession extracted in conditions that no person with an intact mind could resist. Hundreds of people, the vast majority being women, were found guilty of witchcraft in Essex and sentenced to death. More than 100 people were executed, and many others died in prison while awaiting trial, succumbing to disease, malnutrition, or the effects of torture and the harsh conditions. So, who were the accused exactly? The witch trial records show some clear patterns. They were mostly women, elderly, widowed, or living alone. Out of many people convicted under this act, only one was a man. Imagine being that guy. I think about him sometimes. What must he have done? Because the entire system, as designed, was not looking for him. They were typically older women, and many were referred to as widow. So basically, if you had wrinkles and independence, you were suspicious. They were among the poorest, relying on charity, and women without male protection. In short, vulnerable and easy to blame. Many were even known healers. They were also given the title of cunning women for knowing too much. Accusations often followed petty disputes, refused charity, borrowed items, or simple grudges. Accusations often ran in families. Once one person was accused, the whole family basically got an unfortunate reputation upgrade. What were they accused of? There were records stating people were accused for preventing a batch of beer from fermenting, preventing cheese from setting, and made livestock ill or die. Most often, at this time in history, a community relied on someone, usually a woman, who had some knowledge of medicinal herbs in times of illness. They healed people, delivered babies, but the moment something went wrong, it was an easy option to blame the local healer. So basically, you are not an angel for saving many, but you are a witch for failing one. Some people also just used witchcraft laws to rid themselves of mentally ill, nuisance neighbors, or others who were a burden. We must discuss about someone I can't fully decode. And trust me, I spend 20 hours a day, 7 days a week decoding people. The final and most devastating wave of Essex witch trials came in 1645 to 1647, orchestrated by Matthew Hopkins, General. The self-styled Witchfinder General. Hopkins, a failed lawyer from Mourning Map in Essex, launched a witch hunting campaign during the chaos of the English Civil War. His methods were brutal. And here is the thing about Hopkins that I need you to hold on to. He was not doing charity. He charged by the conviction. This was business. Towns and villages across Essex paid him fees per witch brought to trial. In Ipswich in 1645, the local authorities had to levy a special tax just to cover the costs of his operations. Matthew Hopkins was not a fanatic who believed, he was an entrepreneur who profited. His methods were these. He would use sleep deprivation, where he would force the accused to walk back and forth in a room for 24 to 48 hours without sleep. Eventually, the victim would hallucinate, and Hopkins would claim their ramblings were confessions. Now, English law did not allow torture to extract confessions for witchcraft, unlike Scotland or France. However, sleep deprivation was used because it wasn't technically torture under the law. There was also the swimming test. His argument was, since witches had rejected the water of baptism, water would in return reject them. So, he would throw the people into the rivers. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent. But they often just drowned anyway. So, you are either guilty and hanged or innocent and drowned. There is also searching for witch marks, which is examining bodies for unusual marks where familiars supposedly fed. And he would also sit the accused on a stool in the middle of a room and watch them. If a fly, a spider, or even a mouse entered the room, he claimed it was a familiar sent by the devil to comfort the witch. He also carried a blunt knife. When he cut the arm of an accused, if she didn't bleed, witch. If she did bleed, possibly still a witch. We just have to keep looking. In just 2 years, he was responsible for more executions than had occurred in the previous century. Estimates suggest he caused the deaths of almost 300 people, though exact numbers are highly disputed. His first target was a woman named Elizabeth Clark. She was one-legged, toothless, elderly, living alone in Manningtree. Accused by a local tailor, Hopkins kept her awake for days until her mind gave way and she confessed. And this is how the snowball started. She was made to name others. Those women were brought in, kept awake, broken. Then those women named more women. One woman's shattered confession unraveled hundreds of lives. Hopkins' reign ended in 1647. He died that year, you see. One of the most popular legends is that the people eventually turned on him. The legend says they accused him of being a witch, asking how he knew so much about the devil's marks, and forced him to undergo his own swimming test. And he floated, and they hanged him. Although it might just be a wishful thinking from our side. Most probably, he just succumbed to TB. You know, a younger version of me might have called it poetic justice, might have found comfort in the idea that he was made to suffer as he made others suffer. But is this even justice enough? For the people who were accused, tortured, and executed, does a single metered punishment even begin to answer the scale of harm that was done to them? Perhaps the legend says less about him and more about us. It reveals a need to believe that cruelty is eventually returned, that the world corrects itself. But history rarely offers that reassurance. For those who suffered under him and under people like him, there is no clean resolution. There is no balancing of accounts, only the quiet fact that he died and they would never get their justice. Very little is known about Hopkins, but he is a fourth out of 6 children to a vicar. A crowded home, he grew up surrounded by booming voice where his own held no weight. And judging by how he has led his life, we can say that there is a specific kind of darkness that grows in a man who feels invisible. When someone feels weak, inadequate, or like a failure, they try to overcorrect by asserting dominance on others. He found the people who exist in the margins, the ones who cannot scream loud enough to be heard, and placed his boot on their necks so that finally he was the tallest person in the room. Maybe it wasn't just belief in witches, maybe it was something simpler and darker. A man who failed in his own life, finding people who couldn't fight back and calling it justice. What must it have felt like to bring such grief upon people, to be so cruel and to destroy so many lives? Do you think whatever he got from it was worth it? Now I want to ask the question underneath all of this. Not Hopkins, he's simpler to explain. But what about the neighbors? What about an ordinary person, a farmer, a tradesman, a woman at a market? Look at the woman next door and say, she did this. She caused my cow to die. She is the reason my child is sick. When we look back at the witch trials, we want to believe it was just madness. But maybe it was something more calculated. When something goes wrong, like illness, death, or a crop failure, humans have strong need to blame someone. In the past, there is no science to explain disease or bad weather. In that darkness, people stopped asking what happened and they started asking a much more dangerous question. Who caused this? And the answer was always someone different, someone they can't understand, someone vulnerable or just inconvenient. Or maybe it's just our pattern seeking brain. Think about it. I do it, you do it, everybody does it. We are always looking for hidden meanings, for signs from the universe. We are constantly trying to decode our lives, searching for a bigger purpose in the chaos. But this isn't just a personality trait, it is a survival mechanism. Humans are hardwired to find patterns and connect unrelated events. Imagine, a woman in the market argues with you. She's frustrated, she mutters something under her breath, and she walks away. Then, the very next day, your cow, your family's literal lifeline, suddenly dies. Your mind goes, she did this. It's a tendency to, but the truth is, the pigs die of pig things. The beer probably didn't ferment because beer sometimes doesn't ferment. You see, witches weren't always real, but the fear was. And sometimes fear is all people need to destroy someone else. I remember walking into the city thinking, this place holds history, heavy history, the kind that should sit in your chest a little. I was told that there's a plaque and an oak tree to remember the people who were executed. I don't know what I expected, maybe something solemn, something that makes you pause and think about the lost souls, think about the grieving families. But when I got there, it really wasn't a tree. It was more like an oak plant. Small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. And the plaque? It was not grand, not commanding, it was just there. Quiet, almost too quiet. Even the resting place, it did not feel marked by anything unique. No sense that something terrible had happened there. No weight, no presence. And then, just a short walk away, right in the middle of the city, there's this huge memorial built for war soldiers. Solid, imposing, impossible to ignore. And I just stood there thinking, it's strange, isn't it? How we choose who to remember. Some lives are carved into stone, while others are left in corners, with a tree that hasn't quite grown yet. It almost feels like we are still deciding whose deaths mattered more. And then I noticed the words carved into the memorial: our glorious dead. Glorious people. I stood there for a second thinking, what exactly is glorious about death? Is it the suffering? Is it the loss? Is it the families that never really recovered? Or is it something else? Because maybe it's not really about the dead at all. Maybe it's about the living. Maybe calling it glorious is easier than admitting how helpless we are. That some deaths, especially in war or in tragedies, can't be undone, can't be justified, and can never be fully understood. So we dress it up. We give it meaning. We give it honor. We give it words like glory, in the hopes that it hurts a little less, because the alternative truth is terrifying. That the death was random, that it was senseless, that it didn't have to happen. And as humans, we don't do well with that kind of uncertainty, do we? We need stories, we need purpose, even if we have to create it out of thin air so that we can fool ourselves to sleep at night without crying our eyes out. Maybe that's why some deaths are remembered as glorious and others are barely marked at all. Not because one mattered more than the other, but because some are easier to make sense than the others. Let's hear about some of the witches that had to die in Chelmsford. Agnes Waterhouse was one of the first women executed for witchcraft in England. She was older, poor, and lived on the edges of society. Exactly the kind of woman people did not understand, hence feared. They said she had a cat named Satan, a familiar that helped her perform magic. This trial was the first time witchcraft pamphlets were printed and sold like tabloids. People queued up to read her death like we do these days with crime documentaries. But if you look closely, her story feels smaller, sadder. A woman surviving however she could, and when something went wrong, she became the answer. She was hanged in 1566. We have Elizabeth Frances. She didn't just get accused, she also confessed. She spoke of a white spotted cat she inherited from her grandmother, claiming it granted wishes in exchange for blood. But here's the thing about confessions in witch trials: they were often shaped by fear, pressure, and expectation. What unspeakable things she must have gone through before this so called confession. Elizabeth wasn't executed, she was imprisoned, but her words helped condemn others, including her own family. We also have Ursula Kemp, who was a midwife and healer. She helped bring life into the world, but was accused of working with spirits that brought death. They said that she had multiple familiars, but her real crime? A falling out with a neighbor. That was enough. She was executed in 1582. Different women, different lives, but almost similar ending. Not because they were witches, but because someone needed them to be. I want to quote something from a book that I recently read. It's called The Complete Book of Devils and Demons, written by Leonard R. and Ashley. In a column, the author discusses why women rather than men are most often witches. Author explains that many old writers believed women were naturally weaker, more deceitful, and less able to resist the devil. Some even tried to justify this using language and religion, like the idea that femina is derived from fe and minus, because women, in their opinion, are imperfect because we are made from bent rib. These writers strongly believed women were more likely to fall into sin than men. But author points out the irony that these ideas came from men like celibate monks who had limited or no real experience with women. Even King James I wrote that women are easier to deceive by the devil, while other writers blamed women's emotions and passion for making them more likely to be witches. But Ashley also highlights a deeper truth. These beliefs were not facts, but bias and fear. The author suggests that witch trials were deeply linked to misogyny in religion and society, where women's power, independence, and intuition were feared and perhaps envied. Author argues that the history of witchcraft is not just about superstition, it is also about long history of oppression of women and how fear was used to control them. Anyway, history just doesn't live in the books, it lingers all around us, waiting for someone to notice. So the next time you walk through a quiet street, an old town, or a forgotten corner, ask yourself what happened here and who paid the price. The people we called witches, were they really what we feared? Or simply what we didn't understand? And maybe the scariest part isn't what happened back then, but how easily it could happen again, only to be forgotten again. Here is what Chelmsford taught me. The thing about fear is, it starts in the same place love does. But when love has nowhere to go, it becomes grief. And when fear has nowhere to go, it looks for someone to blame. And it will always find the person who is already alone. Those women were not destroyed because they were dangerous. They were destroyed because someone needed somewhere to put their pain. And I am sure you have someone in your life just like that. Someone a little strange, a little inconvenient, a little too loud, or a little too quiet, like myself. And maybe this time it can be different. Maybe instead of grief and pain, you can give them love, compassion, and a little room to exist freely. You can be different. You can be better than anyone who came before you. Be kind to the unusual ones. Spend time with them. I promise we don't bite. I'll leave you with that thought. If my narrative stayed with you, share it, think about it, and maybe start questioning everything. Signing off until my next year finds you, the one who is filled with light. Also, find me on Instagram and my personal blog, both named The Mourning Map. More words, more light waiting for you there.